Hey guys, tonight we wander into the misty silence of a forgotten world, somewhere deep in the jungles of Cambodia, where trees wrap their roots around stone like curious fingers and frogs echo across mossy courtyards. You don't know it yet, but beneath your feet, a massive reservoir still rests, not filled with water anymore, just damp soil and whispers. This is Angkor, the heart of the ancient Khmer Empire. And tonight, you're not just visiting ruins. You're entering an entire civilization built around one question. What do we do when the sky stops raining? Spoiler, if you lived here and didn't figure that out, you probably wouldn't survive the year. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through wet leaves at dawn. The jungle is quiet, almost reverent. Every stone underfoot is slick with morning dew. And overhead, the trees filter the early light into strips of shifting gold. You can feel the air thick, still clinging to last night's rain, like it hasn't decided whether to stay asleep or start steaming. Before you, the temple rises stone stacked on stone, lintels sagging just slightly with age. A vine has draped itself over a corner like a lazy curtain. But that's not what catches your attention. It's the water. Well, where water used to be, you're standing beside a massive rectangular pit. Too symmetrical to be natural, too wide to be a moat. It stretches out beyond the tree line. Still, empty. But if you listen hard, you can almost hear the echo of ancient splashes. This is a baray, a man-made reservoir. And it isn't just large, it's the size of a small city, built by hand, dug out of jungle, lined with clay, shaped with stone, and designed to catch monsoon rain like a cupped palm turned toward the sky. Imagine the sheer effort, thousands of workers, bamboo tools, buckets of soil carted off day by day, year by year, all to create a place that could catch the sky. Because here's the thing, Angkor wasn't built next to a reliable river. The Khmer didn't settle beside one gentle, lazy stream like the Nile or the Tigris. Instead, they settled where the rain came and went, sometimes generously, sometimes with maddening indifference. Too much water, and everything floods. Too little, and the rice dies. So the solution, engineer the weather. Or at least prepare for its worst mood swings. You glance around. Everything is still. But the layout of the place whispers of purpose. Dikes and embankments that once kept the water penned in like nervous livestock. Spillways to guide overflow. Channels so long and straight you'd think they were traced with a ruler the size of a cathedral. It's boring. Gloriously boring. Because boredom, in this case, meant survival. Historians still argue whether the very first beret was symbolic or practical. Some say it represented the mythical sea of milk from Hindu cosmology. Others say it was simply a panic measure after one really bad dry season. Both might be true. In the Khmer world, the line between spiritual symbolism and civic engineering was blurrier than your glasses after a rainstorm. And yes, it's a bit mind-blowing to realize that all of this, these massive reservoirs, aligned temples, underground piping was built 1,000 years ago. Without bulldozers, without concrete mixers, without GPS, just a whole lot of belief and a whole lot more mud. You stand at the edge of the dried reservoir, tracing its length with your eyes. It's easy to miss the brilliance when there's no water glinting back. But the bones are still there. The quiet bones of an empire that looked at the sky and thought, sure, let's build a solution. And if you close your eyes for a moment, you can almost hear it. The splash of rain filling a basin, the rush of water into stone-cut channels, the murmur of monks measuring the flow, the creak of a wooden sluice gate, lowered carefully by hand. Still water, still watching. And this is only the beginning. The path curves gently now, guiding you away from the hushed stone basin and deeper into the ghost of a city that once thrummed with intention. You step over broken branches and dodge a low-hanging fig leaf that has clearly claimed this trail as its own. Your sandals, real or imagined, catch a bit of damp earth. And all the while, the forest exhales quietly around you. But let's rewind for a second. You're in the heart of what was once the Khmer Empire, one of the largest and most powerful civilizations in Southeast Asia, reigning from the 9th to the 15th century. At its height, the empire stretched across much of what is now Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. But here's the weird part. It was an empire entirely dependent on the sky. You see, the land was fertile, sure. The people, skilled, absolutely. But none of that mattered without rain. The monsoon season was both a blessing and a threat. It came like a tidal wave across the sky, months of intense, almost daily rain that flooded the plains, turned footpaths into rivers, and had temples growing moss faster than you could sweep it off. But when the rain left, it really left. Gone for months. The fields cracked. The rivers shrank into sad little rivulets. Dust settled in your ears. Your crops looked like they were auditioning for a drought documentary. So, naturally, the Khmer people had to make a choice, either live at the mercy of unpredictable weather patterns, or engineer the land so well that the weather had to respect them. Spoiler, they chose option 2. Now here's a curious thing: they didn't build their capital near a major river. No floating palaces on the Mekong. No leisurely river trade through the heart of town like you see in other ancient cities. Angkor was built slightly inland, where rivers were seasonal, stingy, and occasionally rebellious. Why? Because relying on a river meant relying on something you couldn't control. Instead, they built canals, reservoirs, moats, entire cities designed not around what the water was doing, but what it might do, or refuse to do. It was an empire not just of kings and warriors, but of hydrologists with serious follow-through. Historians still argue whether the placement of Angkor was due to strategic planning, religious geography, or the sheer audacity of a king who liked a challenge. Some claim the sacred mountain Phnom Kulen nearby dictated the site. Others say it was the existing land gradient perfect for gravity-fed irrigation that made the choice obvious. Either way, Angkor became a marvel not because of where it sat, but how it handled water. You reach a clearing, and before you lies another basin smaller this time. A faded rectangle that once shimmered with collected rain. You squint and see the traces of a clay lining at the base cracked now, but still holding the memory of purpose. This, too, was part of the system. Every puddle, every slope, every oddly shaped dip in the earth around here. It wasn't an accident. It was a design. A plan to tame the wild, seasonal pulse of the land. Because when the monsoons came, they didn't just dump water, they erased certainty. And when they left, they didn't gently fade, they vanished, leaving crops half-grown, reservoirs half-filled, and monks wondering if they'd need to invent divine irrigation next. So the Khmers engineered. They built large-scale storage solutions, canal systems, overflow channels, even the temples, majestic as they were, doubled as hydraulic elements, elevated platforms to protect from floods, moats to regulate groundwater. Even drainage systems so sophisticated you could probably wash your hands at 4 different altars without ever running out. There's a story, half historical fact, half whispered legend of a king who ordered a beret to be expanded during a particularly wet year. His officials warned him it was too risky. The ground was unstable, the labor force exhausted. He replied, "If the gods give too much, I shall hold more." You can almost picture him standing at the edge of a freshly dug basin, soaked from head to toe, holding a parasol that wasn't helping, rain pouring down around him, and still he dared the sky to keep going. Because in the Khmer Empire, rain was power, and whoever could catch it, store it, and send it where it was needed. That was the real king. Even now, the ground here remembers water. The grass bends in directions shaped by ancient flow. The moss grows thicker where the channels once carried runoff. And you, standing quietly among these remnants, start to understand just how intentional this forgotten world really was. You step off the path and pause. There's something underfoot. A faint depression in the earth, lined with old stones, disappearing into the underbrush. Another channel. Another ghost vein. You follow it for a few steps before it vanishes again under tangled roots and time. And you realize even when the sky failed them, the Khmers built for both extremes. They didn't just hope for balance, they designed for it. You take a few slow steps, tracing the outline of that half-buried channel with your toe. It curves gently, lined with rough-hewn stone blocks, most of them shifted slightly by time, as if the earth has been trying to reclaim them one polite nudge at a time. It's quiet here, but not empty. There's always something watching in the jungle. A monkey? A bird? A 1,000-year-old reservoir that refuses to admit it's retired. And you're starting to notice something odd. Despite everything you know about ancient civilizations, how they typically sprang up along rivers, use them for trade, for farming, for worship here in Angkor. The rivers are suspiciously absent. You haven't heard one gurgle, not even a trickle. That's because the Khmer Empire, in its divine wisdom or sheer stubbornness, chose not to build their capital near a permanent, reliable river. Bold move, honestly. It's like setting up a smoothie shop in the middle of a desert and saying, "We'll make our own bananas. Thanks." So, why? Well, the rivers in this region are temperamental. The Great Tonle Sap Lake nearby, yes, it expands massively in the rainy season, but its rivers can reverse direction. Literally. One season they flow one way, then turn around and head the other, which is fantastic if you enjoy water with commitment issues, but terrible if you want a steady water supply. Instead of bowing to the river's whim, the Khmers turned their gaze upward. If they couldn't rely on a river, they would rely on rain and they would trap it. You wander past another pile of stones, clearly the remnants of a retaining wall. It's angled, not quite straight, like it was meant to slow water, not block it. A small notch carved into the top edge likely fed water into a catch basin, or let the overflow escape when the system said, "Okay, that's enough." Everything here's quiet, but deliberate. This wasn't improvisation. It was a plan. Historians still argue whether the decision to avoid rivers was driven by engineering logic or spiritual cosmology. Some suggest that the Angkor region was chosen for its spiritual alignment with sacred mountains and celestial markers, making water an afterthought. Others insist it was the land's natural topography, a gentle slope, perfect for channeling rain into reservoirs that sealed the deal. Either way, they chose land over liquid, which meant they had to make everything from scratch. Moats, canals, holding ponds, giant reservoirs lined with baked clay and sandstone. And yes, every single one had to be dug by hand. And they weren't just scooping water into ditches and hoping for the best. No. These people were modeling the behavior of monsoon rain like it was a house guest with unpredictable moods. If the rain dumped too hard, the canals could redirect the overflow. If it trickled in gently, the barays could hold it over months, releasing it bit by bit into the rice fields like some ancient hydraulic slow drip V. One of the most fascinating details, they had no pumps. None. Everything relied on gravity. A half-degree slope here, a shallow basin there, channels that zigzag just enough to lose speed, but not direction. It's the kind of precision that makes you wonder if every Khmer engineer secretly had a background in Zen gardening. You pause beside a pile of half-submerged blocks, maybe a spillway once. Now just a rock bed colonized by ants and ferns. But look closer. Some of the stones are carved, not decoratively, functionally. Grooves, notches, fitted joins where water used to flow through in regulated sheets, like a medieval water park, minus the screaming. The city of Angkor didn't just collect water, it tamed it. Every flood that threatened, every drought that lingered, had to contend with the civilization that built its power on patience. That's really what these reservoirs were. Patience in stone. Stored rain for the next dry season. Overflow canals for the next storm. A network so finely balanced that it functioned for centuries, until it didn't. But that's a story for later. For now, you look up. The jungle canopy filters the light into watery green waves. The air smells of wet leaves and distant blossoms. Somewhere in the trees, a cicada starts its high-pitched solo, and you can't help but imagine it echoing across these waters when they were full. Full of rain, full of hope, full of quiet engineering brilliance wrapped in sacred silence. And as you walk past yet another stone-lined trough, curving into the woods, you start to see what the Khmer saw. That the river doesn't need to be next to you. You can build your own. The forest thickens slightly as you walk. Vines sag across the trail like lazy arms. Trees lean in closer, their roots sprawling over fallen blocks as if trying to reassemble the city themselves. But you keep following the faint line of stones, because you know now you're not just walking through jungle. You're walking along an old baray. And this one's famous. The West Baray. It stretches nearly 5 miles long and over a mile wide, so vast that when it was full, it looked more like a lake than a reservoir. A man-made lake. Constructed in a time when the only tools available were baskets, shovels, and very tired humans. You squint toward the horizon. If you didn't know better, you'd never guess this wasn't carved by nature. But nope, this was dug. Dug with intention. Dug with faith. And probably dug with a great deal of muttering under breath. Imagine tens of thousands of laborers, each one hauling soil by hand, shaping embankments that would hold not just water, but the entire agricultural economy of the empire. And why? Because water meant rice, and rice meant taxes, and taxes meant temples, and temples meant power. The whole empire ran on a cycle of rice, rain, and reservoirs, and the West Baray. That was the heart of it. Historians still argue whether it was built purely for irrigation or if it had spiritual symbolism layered in. Some point to its precise alignment with nearby temples and say it represented the cosmic sea in Hindu cosmology. Others think that's a poetic bonus, nice. But secondary to its real job catching the monsoon, the logistics of building it boggle the mind. First, they had to dig out the land, flatten it, shape it, line it, Then they constructed massive dikes on all four sides, some of which still stand, covered in brush and small trees now. You're probably walking on one. But the digging, that was the real challenge. The soil had to go somewhere. And rather than cart it off endlessly, the Khmer engineers built artificial hills and embankments from the spoil. One of them even became a temple platform because nothing says waste not like turning your dirt pile into a shrine. And this wasn't done in months. It took years, possibly decades, a lifetime project, handed down from one crew of workers to the next like a divine group project. Nobody was allowed to quit. And yet, it worked. When the rains came, they filled the baray. Slowly at first, puddles pooling into streams merging into a shallow lake. Then, after weeks of daily monsoon downpours, the basin brimmed, and from there the water could be diverted. Not with buckets, with canals, a whole grid of them. Each one sloped precisely to carry water out to the rice fields beyond Angkor. These canals ran for miles, feeding crops, filling ponds, even cooling temple courtyards. You pause by a break in the trees where a stone embankment is still visible, a sharp line against the earth, like the jungle couldn't quite finish erasing it. You can almost picture the water lapping at the edge, almost hear the splash of someone's palm cutting through it, almost feel the sheer relief this water must have brought to a farmer staring down another dry season. And it wasn't just the West Baray, there were others. The East Baray, the Jayatataka, a dozen smaller ones, each with its own purpose, some for irrigation, some for ritual, some for a little bit of both. Because the Khmer Empire didn't just build one big basin and call it a day, they created a network, a system of interconnected reservoirs, all collecting, storing, and redistributing water depending on the season. Some were designed to flood intentionally, spilling into overflow canals to prevent damage to temple foundations. Some were placed near roads so travelers could water their animals. And some were situated right next to royal temples because if the gods wanted a drink, the empire wasn't about to disappoint. A quirky rumor found in a French explorer's field notes from the 1800s tells of local villagers who believed the barays were dug by giants because no normal human could have possibly moved that much earth. And honestly fair, you reach the edge of a shallow depression now, just a dip in the land, covered in grass. But it used to be filled with water. You can tell by the alignment of the stones around it. They don't just ring the edge, they lean slightly, shaped to guide water down, then out again. It's subtle, you'd miss it if you weren't looking. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every bump, every groove, every stone. It's part of the puzzle. The barays were more than storage. They were statements. Proof that the Khmer Empire wasn't just surviving the monsoon, it was managing it. And every time you see a ripple in the earth or a sagging wall that looks too straight to be natural, you're seeing the remnants of that management, of that ambition, of that glorious, muddy, back-breaking belief that if you worked hard enough, you could hold the sky in your hands. You follow the outline of the old baray until the jungle parts like a curtain, revealing something that at first glance just looks like a very large ditch. But as your eyes adjust to the light, you notice its shape, perfectly rectangular, too perfect to be accidental, carved into the earth with mathematical confidence, and lined with stones that once fit together like teeth in a clenched jaw. This isn't a ditch, it's a moat. And like everything else in Angkor, it's not just for decoration. Sure, it looks majestic. Wrap a moat around a temple, and suddenly it feels like that temple has secrets, like it's floating above the concerns of the everyday world. like monks had to levitate just to clock in. But here's the thing. This moat isn't just symbolic, it's functional. Angkor's temple moats were part of its water regulation system. Subtle hydraulic tools dressed up as sacred space. Because when your city is prone to seasonal floods and droughts, you can't just build pretty things. You have to build smart. And that's exactly what they did. The moat you're staring at, possibly the one that wraps around Angkor Wat, is deep. Too deep for purely aesthetic ambitions. Its depth, its width, and even its slope were carefully designed to manage water flow throughout the temple complex and beyond. Here's how it worked. When the monsoon hit, rain didn't just hammer rooftops and flood the courtyards. It streamed off stone floors and down temple stairs, threatening to erode foundations and drown the very monuments meant to last centuries. So the moat stepped in. They collected that water, redirected it. They acted like giant gutters, or sponges, or passive-aggressive neighbors who take in your overflow and pretend not to mind. Historians still argue whether the moats were built before the temples, or added after some rather soggy regrets. Some say the layout of the moats actually dictated the orientation of the buildings. Others believe they were an afterthought, a brilliant one. But an afterthought nonetheless. Whatever the case, they worked. Water from surrounding rain catchments would fill the moat, slowly helping to stabilize the groundwater table beneath the temple. Because when the water table shifts, the land shifts. And when the land shifts, your fancy sandstone monument starts leaning like it's had too much fermented palm sap. So the moats weren't just protecting the temple from above, they were anchoring it below. You crouch beside the waterline, what's left of it, and run a hand along the edge of the slope. It's not just a clean drop. It curves inward gently, like a hand cupping a coin. This controlled how fast water entered, how it circulated, and how it evaporated. Oh, yes, evaporation was part of the plan too. Too much water. Let the sun take some. Too little, slow it down with shade trees and gentle curves. The water here was never just a puddle, it was performance art. You step back and gaze across the width of the moat. It reflects the sky faintly, a gray-blue mirror cracked by lily pads and drifting leaves. At the center stands the temple, rising from its platform, perfectly symmetrical, as if balancing on a tightrope between heaven and earth. And that illusion, that floating temple aesthetic, that wasn't just for spiritual flair, it was part of the engineering psychology. Make something seem weightless, and you make it seem eternal. Make it float, and you make it transcend. But also, make it float, and you're less likely to have it sink into a soggy pit of failure. Practical and divine. A temple moat is like that one monk in every monastery who hums softly while sweeping, pleasant to look at. Gentle in function, and secretly running the whole place. A quirky detail uncovered by archaeologists recently, some moats were lined not just with stone, but with tightly packed clay and layers of charcoal. Why charcoal? Because it filtered the water. Yep. Ancient Khmer engineers were adding filtration layers to their moats over 1,000 years ago. So the moat didn't just hold water, it held cleaner water. Water that could feed gardens, cool rooms, reflect moonlight, and act as a backup supply in dry months. You can still see some of the original embankments now raised slightly, traced by low walls where temple guards might have once stood, squinting at the sky and wondering if the rain would come today, or if they should start drawing up water from the deeper channels. The moats connected to those barays you saw earlier. Everything was linked. Nothing was built in isolation. Even the water had routes. Channels beneath the temples, overflow weirs hidden behind sculpted naga heads, drainage outlets shaped like lotuses. every drop had somewhere to go, somewhere it was meant to go. And when the rain didn't come, well, that's why they built the reservoirs. The moats held water, the barays stored it, the canals moved it, and the temples, they survived because of it. You take one last look across the moat. It's quiet now, still, but you can almost hear it, the soft trickle of water shifting, the gentle pull of gravity coaxing a droplet toward the next channel, the murmur of monks murmuring as they watch the levels rise and fall like a heartbeat under stone. Even in stillness, the system remembers. Even in silence, it works. You leave the temple moat behind, stepping carefully over a route that's decided to occupy both the path and a retired wall simultaneously. The air is warm and still, like it's holding its breath. Even the birds have gone quiet for now. You're not sure if it's reverence, laziness, or just a perfectly timed jungle nap. Then the trees part, and there it is. Angkor Wat. Not the postcards, not the tourist-filtered angles. The real thing. It rises before you like an idea that someone insisted should be made out of stone, no matter how ridiculous that sounded. Towers stacked like folded lotus buds. Walls covered in carvings that range from divine battles to, you swear, a monkey making questionable choices. A place built to touch the sky and, strangely, also very grounded. And here's the kicker. It's aligned with the monsoon. Not just metaphorically, literally. The layout of Angkor Wat, this iconic, spiritual megastructure, wasn't chosen randomly. It's designed with the wet season in mind. The whole complex faces west, which has confused scholars for decades, since most temples in the region point east. East is sunrise, new beginnings. West, on the other hand, is sunset, endings, symbolic death, or maybe just a really strong opinion about sun glare. Historians still argue about this orientation. Some say it was built as a funerary temple for King Suryavarman II, aligning with the setting sun for symbolic reasons. Others argue it was meant to align with the monsoon cycle, allowing for optimal water flow and ceremonial processions during the rainy season. Either way, the orientation isn't just cosmic, it's hydraulic. Because Angkor Wat doesn't sit on a dry stone base like some dramatic diva, it sits in a moisture-managed sandbox. Its entire platform was raised, its foundations surrounded by hidden drains, sloped pathways, and, of course, another moat. The rain that hits the rooftops. It travels through channels carved into stairwells and terraces, guided by gravity and groove down into catchment drains and retention pools. That's right. The temple drains. Just pause and admire the image, a sacred mountain of stone, etched with gods and cosmic calendars, quietly draining rainwater like a very humble colander. But it's not humble. It's genius. Because in a region where a few days of monsoon rain can turn your average village into a soggy rice porridge, being able to shed water is as important as being able to store it. And Angkor Wat, it does both. Engineers, yes, engineers. Not just priests designed the temple's foundation layers with compacted sand and hidden clay basins to keep the water table stable beneath it. It's like they said, sure, let's build the most elaborate temple complex ever seen, but let's also make sure it doesn't sink into the earth like a surprised elephant. You walk along one of the elevated galleries now, tracing the rain paths with your eyes. See that groove carved just beside the walkway. That's not for decoration. It's a water line. During the rainy season, it would have shimmered with runoff, guiding water gently away from the footpaths. Every carved balustrade, every lotus petal roof slope, it's all angled to manage water. A temple that could breathe with the monsoon, absorb its weight, release it slowly, stay standing. It's not flashy engineering. It's invisible. Until you look closely. Until you feel it underfoot. Until you watch the rain start to fall and realize, oh right, this was part of the plan. And the plan went further. Water wasn't just channeled downward. It was also directed outward to connected moats. Then canals. Then eventually to faraway reservoirs. A drop that hit the central tower of Angkor Wat could, in theory, end up helping irrigate a rice field a mile away. Imagine a water system so integrated that even a temple roof participates. And it wasn't just Angkor Wat. The same logic applied to other temples. Bante Samre, Pre Rup, Ta Prom. Each one embedded in the great watery circuit like a holy circuit board, where the spiritual and the practical were not just neighbors, they were housemates. A quirky find in a carved wall at Bante Chmar shows a relief of Vishnu standing over a stream with stylized fish beneath his feet. Nothing unusual until you realize the stream is shaped like an actual canal from the real-world site. It's a subtle nod that the divine literally flowed through this city. Back at Angkor Wat, you pause in a shaded alcove. The stone here is cool, even in the sticky air. Somewhere above, water might still trickle through a forgotten drain, or collect in a small basin carved by centuries of careful planning and even more careful erosion. And the more you look at this place not as a temple, but as a machine, the more astonishing it becomes. Because it's not just about worship, it's about weatherproofing belief. And rain-blessed chaotic. Necessary rain isn't just feared or prayed against here. It's part of the architecture. The monsoon isn't an intruder. It's invited. You step out from the shadow of Angkor Wat's towering spires, letting the sunlight settle on your shoulders like a warm towel. The path ahead is dusty, littered with leaves that look like they've been dropped very purposefully by trees that are slightly too smug for their own good. As you walk, you imagine the hands that built this. Not just stone carvers and spiritual advisors, but the engineers, the ones who turned jungle into blueprint. And at the heart of that transformation was a king named Yashovarman. He ruled in the 9th century, and if the name doesn't ring a bell, that's fine. He wasn't exactly the rock star of Khmer kings, more like the brilliant civil engineer who happened to wear a crown and possibly had opinions about slope angles that kept his advisors up at night. Yashovarman wasn't content with just temples and ceremonies. He looked at the monsoon-drenched plains of Angkor and said, "What if we built a water tank the size of a mountain?" Because apparently, thinking small was not his thing. Thus came the construction of the East Baray, one of the first and largest artificial reservoirs ever made by the Khmer Empire. Built northeast of Angkor, it stretched almost 5 miles long and 1.5 miles wide. And no, your math isn't off. That's a reservoir the size of Manhattan's entire Central Park. Without bulldozers, without backhoes, without project managers sending passive-aggressive scrolls about deadlines, just manual labor, thousands of baskets, and sheer monarchical willpower. Historians still argue whether Yashovarman truly initiated the project himself or inherited and expanded it. Some say it was his father's vision. Others say it was his way of claiming dominance, building a reservoir so vast that even the clouds might pause and take notes. Regardless, the East Baray became a marvel. It wasn't just big, it was engineered. Its dikes were constructed with precise layering clay, then sand, then compacted earth like a cake no one would ever eat but everyone would rely on. Channels fed into it from nearby hills, some natural, some carved by hand. Spillways prevented overflow. And in dry seasons, gates released water down into canals that fed rice fields in a slow, measured trickle. Because again, there were no pumps. Gravity was king. But what's most astonishing is that Yashovarman didn't build the East Baray next to one of his temples. He built his temple, Phnom Bakheng, on a nearby hill, a perfect vantage point to look down at the reservoir. A water king perched above his lake. It's poetic. Also, probably very convenient for checking if someone left the sluice gate open again. From Phnom Bakheng, you could see it all: the reservoir, the canals, the surrounding fields, and eventually the mighty Angkor Thom, which would rise later to the northwest. But for now, under Yashovarman's rule, the focus was water. Because if you could control the monsoon, you could control everything. The rain became predictable. The crops grew on schedule. The people were fed, taxed, and grateful. And in return, they built. They worshipped. They carried stone, carved gods, and wrote legends in relief across temple walls. You reach the remnants of the East Baray's eastern embankment. It's mostly collapsed now, gently giving into time. Grasses grow where water once stood. The jungle pushes back, inch by inch. Like a slow argument, no one is in a rush to win. But still you can trace it. The rise of the land, the faint slope, the ghost of a retaining wall hidden under lichen. A few centuries ago, this basin would have glittered under the sun. Small boats might have skimmed its surface. Children may have fished along the banks. Priests likely blessed the water. Farmers definitely prayed for more. And it all started because one king looked at a flat plain and thought, "This will be my ocean." A quirky legend still told in nearby villages describes Yashovarman not as a king, but as a rain caller, someone who could speak to the clouds and command them to fill his reservoir. The tale says he once scolded the sky for raining too little, and the thunder answered with a grumble in 3 straight days of storm. Coincidence, probably, but when you stand beside what remains of the East Baray, it's not hard to imagine the sky itself respecting the sheer audacity of the engineering below. The reservoir, once full, would feed miles of farmland, not all at once. Patiently, steadily, with measured confidence, just like the king who ordered it. And that's the pattern you're starting to see here. The Khmer Empire didn't build with panic. It built with foresight. Every brick placed, every canal dug, every leaf-shaped outlet carved into stone, it was all part of a long conversation with the sky. A conversation Yashovarman helped begin. And the echoes of his voice, they still ripple across the land, like the surface of a reservoir on a windless day. You're walking now on a path that was never meant to be a path. It's narrow, shaded, and strangely even. The ground dips a little to your right, just enough to suggest that someone once wanted water to move that way. You follow the curve, passing beneath fig trees and bamboo, and suddenly you realize this isn't just a forest trail. You're walking on top of a buried canal, one of hundreds. These weren't the grand barays or shimmering moats you've seen before. These were the capillaries of Angkor's hydraulic system. Narrow, intentional, and absolutely everywhere. Invisible now, but not forgotten. Because beneath your feet lies a whole network of channels, culverts, clay pipes, and controlled slopes designed to move water with almost no energy input at all. It's hard to imagine it now, walking through silence. But once, these paths flowed. The Khmer engineers built canals that started at reservoirs and radiated outward. They followed the natural slope of the land, not steep enough to rush, not flat enough to stagnate, just the right incline for water to drift like a sleepwalker heading for breakfast. Some of these canals were wide enough to boat down. Others were small trenches lined with stone, meant to feed ponds, gardens, even palace kitchens. And underneath it all, pipes. Yes, actual piping systems, hidden below the walkways and temple floors. Some made of stone, others of clay, many sealed together so tightly they kept flowing for centuries before time and tree roots finally won the argument. Historians still argue how advanced these systems were. Some claim they rivaled Roman aqueducts in cleverness and subtlety. Others believe they were more decentralized, less about central planning and more about layered, adaptive design. Like the Khmer engineers knew the monsoon was moody and preferred to prepare options rather than fixed rules. The canals weren't just about moving water, they were about managing time. In the wet season, they moved overflow to prevent flooding. In the dry season, they delivered water where it was needed most: lowland paddies, bathing pools, sacred ponds that mirrored the temples above them. And every drop that flowed through this system followed the same rule: never waste a drop. You crouch by what looks like a random pile of mossy stone until you realize it's a sluice gate. A narrow gap between two carefully carved blocks, angled downward. Originally, it would have had a wooden gate or even a stone plug, pulled or inserted by hand. That gate could control the exact amount of water released downstream. Not too much, not too little. A dropper for the empire. Further down the path, you come across something even more curious. A settling tank? It's a wide stone-lined basin, built a few inches below canal level. Water would collect here briefly before continuing, giving time for sediment to fall out, for debris to settle, for the flow to be clarified. Basically, it's a meditation pool for mud. These tanks prevented silting in downstream fields and ensured that irrigation water stayed clean enough not to choke the crops. And they weren't isolated. Each canal section had features like this: valves, gates, sediment traps, catchment basins. You could almost imagine a monk standing at each one, nodding seriously at the water. Like, "You're good today, but I'm watching," which is not far off from what actually happened. Some monks were assigned to monitor flow, to adjust gates, to clear blockages, to act, essentially, as water shepherds tending to the streams and canals like they were sacred cattle. We'll get to them soon. For now, you trace one of the still visible channels with your eyes. It snakes forward, past tree roots and tangled vines, always hugging the land just so. Just enough to keep moving. Just enough to not stop. And all this entire system was gravity-fed. No pulleys. No animal-powered pumps. Just the land itself, shaped like a whisper. The slopes were subtle, barely noticeable to the naked eye, but precise enough that, over miles, water moved predictably, reliably, gracefully. A quirky feature found by archaeologists. Some spillways used carved naga heads, those multi-headed serpent guardians from Hindu and Buddhist lore, as actual drainage outlets. Imagine rainwater slipping out from a stone snake's mouth, not just beautifully, but purposefully. Function married to symbolism. Always, even when moving dirty water. And this system wasn't only for agriculture. It touched everything. Temple rituals that needed purification water fed by canals. Public baths for the royal city fed by canals. Fish ponds. Lotus pools. Water clocks. And yes, even latrines in palace enclosures. All part of the same system. The city of Angkor didn't sit beside a river because it didn't need one. It became its own engineered watershed. You take one more step. Beneath your foot, the land dips slightly, A groove, long forgotten. Just another silent canal in a jungle that remembers everything, even the water that used to sing. The jungle presses in a little tighter now, less like it's crowding you, and more like it's leaning in to share a secret. The light is dappled and golden, filtering through leaves that shimmer faintly with the day's humidity. You pass under an archway, what's left of it, and find yourself in the ruins of another temple. Smaller than Angkor Wat, quieter. But even here, the stones seem to breathe. And below them, more water. Always more water. Because this temple, like many others in the Khmer Empire, wasn't just a place of worship. It was a clever little hydrological trap. You see, Khmer temples weren't just designed to impress the gods. They were also designed to drain rain. Specifically to collect, redirect, and purify the torrential downpours of the monsoon season. So, yes, the god Vishnu may reign from the central tower, but it's the water engineers who made sure the whole thing didn't melt into a swamp every September. You stand in what used to be a courtyard. You'd think this was just a space for ceremonies, maybe dancing girls with incense sticks and slightly alarmed birds flapping overhead. But if you look closer, you'll notice shallow channels carved into the stone floor. They're not random. They follow a pattern leading to the edge, to a slope, to a... well, yes, that's a drain. A drain. In a temple. 1,000-year-old holy water chute designed to handle excess rain without collapsing the roof or drowning the altar. And guess what? It's still functional. Historians still argue whether these drains were part of the original temple blueprints or added later as "holy moly, it's flooding again" fixes. Some evidence suggests they were there from the beginning, designed alongside the sacred geometry. Others think they evolved over time as practical needs demanded more plumbing with less prayer. Either way, they work. You follow one of the channels along the edge of the inner gallery. It's about the width of your foot and carved just deep enough to catch runoff. It slopes ever so slightly away from the central sanctuary, which was always raised because nothing says divine like being on slightly higher ground during a flash flood. These channels connect to buried pipes, most often made of sandstone or terracotta. They run under the walkways, beneath statues, sometimes even through carved animal mouths. Yes, there are temples where water flows directly out of a lion's face. The system filtered out leaves, dirt, even bugs, keeping temple platforms dry and the water that passed through them usable. Because once it left the sacred space, that water often fed into ritual pools, still basins, square, calm, lined with stone. Not just decorative, they were for ritual cleansing used by monks, priests, and sometimes even royalty before ceremonies. You didn't walk straight from the goat pen to the altar, after all. You bathed, you purified. You used water that had run through the veins of the temple itself. And that's the thing, every drop was transformed. It fell from the sky, rushed down a gutter, passed through a carved channel, slipped beneath a naga-headed spout, and emerged, blessed, or at least clean enough for a monk's armpits. And this wasn't just reserved for the major temples. Even smaller shrines had some version of this system: a sloped roof, a catchment trench, a runoff pool. You begin to see it everywhere. Slanted stone slabs weren't just for rain protection. They were funnels. Floor gaps weren't just construction flaws. They were drains. Even a worn groove by the base of a doorframe might be the remnant of a water channel, slowly carving its way through stone over centuries of wet seasons. A quirky temple detail from Ta Prohm, a now famously overgrown ruin, is the mystery spout, a carved figure whose open mouth once directed water from a rooftop gutter down into a lotus basin. But the carving is peculiar. Scholars debate whether it's a monkey, a god, or a man yelling in frustration. Probably all three. Honestly, back in the courtyard, you find a square depression lined with stone and old water tank, likely for hand washing. It's dry now, filled with leaves and a defiant fern. But the craftsmanship is clear, tight joints, minimal gaps, a slight incline at one edge for overflow. No plastic buckets, no hoses, just rain, guided by stone. And over there, see that small, round hole near the base of the outer wall. That's a weep hole, a pressure release, so the water doesn't build up behind the walls and push the stones apart. Even the temple walls were designed to breathe with the weather. Angkor's temples didn't just withstand the rain, they worked with it. They channeled it, filtered it, elevated it, turned something messy and inconvenient into something sacred. And now, standing here, you hear it the first drip, a soft sound on stone. Rain, the lightest sprinkle. Somewhere high above, a cloud has decided to remember its job. And for a moment, you imagine this whole place alive again. Water trickling through the channels, drops running across sacred floors, pools slowly filling with the sky's offering. Not flooding, not drowning, just flowing, exactly as designed. The rain thickens just a little now, not a downpour, just a slow, steady percussion on leaves above your head. You stay under a stone lintel that offers about as much shelter as a board umbrella, but it's enough to watch the drops hit the ground and vanish into the ancient drain beside your foot. You take a deep breath. The air smells like wet moss and history, and it gets you thinking, what if these reservoirs and moats and drains weren't just clever solutions for farming and storm management? What if they were also cosmic blueprints? Because to the Khmer architects and priests, water wasn't just practical, it was divine geometry. And that brings us to one of the more poetic ideas behind Angkor's engineering reservoirs that mirrored the cosmos. Like actual heavens. You wander over to a higher rise now where you can look out across the ruins. To your left, trees blur into shadowy outlines. Ahead, the shape of another vast baray stretches out a ghost lake that once held more than water. It held meaning. In Hindu cosmology, which deeply influenced Khmer belief systems, the universe is made up of concentric oceans and mountain ranges. At the center, Mount Maru, the home of the gods. Around it, cosmic seas, like spiritual onion layers of sacred water. So when Khmer kings built temples like Angkor Wat or Preah Khan, they weren't just building shrines. They were creating replicas of the universe. The temple was the mountain, the baray, the cosmic ocean surrounding it. Historians still argue just how literal this design intention was. Some believe it was fully symbolic, meant to elevate the king as a god on earth, at the center of his personal cosmos. Others think the alignment with Hindu cosmology was just a flex, a way of saying, hey, our reservoir is so big, it's basically the universe. Either way, it worked. Standing here now, even with the water long gone, you can feel the grandeur of the idea. Imagine it a temple rising from the center of a perfectly square lake, its reflection rippling with each breeze, worshippers arriving by boat, the sun setting directly over the water, casting golden fire across a surface that seems too precise to be real. Even now, dried out and reclaimed by grass, the geometry remains. These were more than containers. They were spiritual mirrors, engineered to reflect not just the sky, but the divine structure of reality. You step closer to the embankment of what used to be the West Baray. Its sides are still elevated man-made ridges that took decades to build. They slope just enough to hold massive volumes of water, yet rise just steeply enough to remind you this wasn't natural. It was crafted. And at the center of this particular baray, there was once an island temple. You can still visit it, called West Mebon. It's not much more than scattered stones now, but it once held shrines, priests, and a sense of being removed from the mortal world. You had to cross water to get there. A literal and symbolic act of leaving the mundane for the sacred, like stepping into a dream. The temple island in the middle of a cosmic sea, built entirely by human hands. You glance at your own hands now and imagine holding a basket of earth, scooping, hauling, pouring. Multiply that by thousands of workers, over years, through rains and dry spells, and you start to grasp the magnitude of belief involved. Because no one builds the cosmos casually. This wasn't just a good irrigation idea. It was a manifestation of the universe. In stone, in water, in order. Even the baray dimensions were intentional. The west baray, for example, what was aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal directions. Its length from east to west about 8,000 meters. Coincidence, maybe. But the Khmer loved aligning things: temples, canals, doorways with solar events, equinoxes, and planetary paths. Everything had a place. And water. It was the medium that held that place. A quirky architectural feature found in some smaller barays carved markers along the stone edges, believed to track water levels not just for function, but possibly for ceremonial timing. Like, oh look, the water hit line 7, it's time for the Rain Retreat Festival. There's even a theory that the water levels in certain barays helped priests decide the agricultural calendar. If the baray was too low, prayers were intensified. If too high, offerings were made to calm the excess. Water as a divine barometer. So now, standing at the edge of a dry reservoir built to mirror eternity, you begin to see the layers. The Khmer engineers weren't just building storage systems, they were creating a stage. A stage where water didn't just flow, it played a role. As provider, as protector, as symbol, as heaven made visible. The rain has slowed to a mist now. And in that soft drizzle, you can almost see it, the great reflection of the past sky across the still surface. Not a ghost, not a memory, just a very quiet design. Still working, even without the water. The mist hangs low now, as if the jungle itself has exhaled a sigh and is in no hurry to pull it back. You walk along a slight ridge, a dike. Really, though now it's overgrown with grass, small trees, and the occasional lizard who acts like it owns the place. The silence is soft, but beneath it, there's a story humming. Because you're tracing the path of a Khmer canal, one of the empire's ancient arteries. Not a stream, not a trickle, but a carefully carved channel that once moved water slow, steady, essential from those enormous barays to the rice fields that fed the entire empire. This is where the magic becomes visible, because for all the grandeur of Angkor's temples, it's here, in the quiet, rural edges of the system, that the real miracle unfolded daily: the movement of water across miles of land without machines. No pumps, no power, just gravity, slope, and a highly specific understanding of how rain behaves when it's given polite directions. You step down onto a sunken path, which used to be the bottom of one such canal. It's wider than expected, nearly 15 feet across, which is more than enough for water and occasionally a boat or two. Oh yes, boats. These weren't just irrigation channels. They were transport routes. Rice, fish, offerings, Even stone blocks for temple construction were moved via canal, shoved onto barges, and floated across long distances like low-budget magic carpets. Historians still argue whether the primary goal of these canals was economic transport or agricultural irrigation. Some suggest they were designed for both from the start, a brilliant two-birds, one-channel system. Others believe the transport benefits were a convenient bonus. Either way, the canals were vital. They allowed for year-round farming. Because that's the trick, monsoon agriculture is a game of timing. You plant too early, your seedlings drown. Too late, they shrivel. But if you can manage the water release it slowly, hold it back. Spread it just thinly enough across the fields, then you can harvest twice, maybe even 3 times a year. And in the Khmer Empire, more rice meant more taxes, more labor, more temples, more power. So, yes, canals mattered. And they weren't haphazard ditches. They were planned, engineered, aligned with the terrain, carved to precise widths and depths, sometimes lined with laterite blocks or compacted clay to prevent collapse. They branched off from the main baray outflows in measured intervals, feeding smaller distribution ditches that ran between rice paddies like careful veins in a green leaf. You come to a bend in the canal where an embankment rises sharply to your right. It's the remnants of a gate, a control point. There would have been a wooden or stone plug here, manually lifted or lowered to regulate how much water flowed into the next section. One monk's daily job may have been to stand here and watch. Wait. Lift the gate. Listen. Lower it again. Repeat. All day. Because this wasn't automation. This was attention. The kind of quiet, relentless focus that turns floodwater into food. You pass what looks like a culvert, an underground pipe that let excess water drain out when the canal overflowed. Some of these had carved lips to prevent erosion. Some had small traps to catch debris. And a few, legend says, had little fish carved on them. Because engineers get bored too. A quirky find near the old canal routes, stone stepping blocks shaped like lotus petals. Arranged just wide enough to walk across the water when the canals were shallow. Historians aren't sure if they were for priests, royalty, or just particularly ambitious ducks. And as you walk, you start to notice something else. Elevation changes. Subtle. But there, each section of canal sits just a little lower than the last. This is how water moved without force. Gravity pulled it forward. The engineers followed the land's natural slope, tweaking it only slightly where necessary, shaping a system where water moved as if by instinct. And even now, in the quiet, you can feel the flow, the memory of motion, the path water once followed, year after year, obedient, vital, until the system began to fade. But that's later. Right now, imagine a day in the Khmer Empire's golden age. It's early morning. A sluice gate creaks open. Water glides down to fresh-cut channel. In the distance, rice paddies shimmer in the sun. Farmers cheer. Monks chant. The smell of wet earth rises with the steam. And the canal. It hums. Not with sound, with function. Even now, it holds that hum. Beneath your feet. Quiet. Steady. Waiting. You take a few more steps, and something shifts not in the ground, but in the atmosphere. The jungle gives way to open sky. A gentle breeze stirs the grass. Ahead, there's a small structure crumbling, moss-covered, and so humble you almost miss it. It's not a temple, not a gate, just a small shelter made of stone and laterite, perched beside the remains of a canal junction, and beside it, a low, rectangular platform, just barely raised above the ground, unadorned, silent. But this, they say, was where the hydraulic monks worked. Yes, monks, the caretakers of water. In the Khmer Empire, water wasn't just managed by engineers and farmers. It was often entrusted to monks who monitored flow levels, adjusted sluices, and maintained the subtle balance between too little and too much. And no, they weren't exactly your typical chanting in orange robes monks. They were technicians in robes, spiritual plumbers, rain accountants, the ones who stared at water levels the way astrologers stared at stars. Imagine it, a lone monk at dawn, crouched beside a canal gate, measuring the depth with a carved stick. He doesn't write anything down. He just knows. Too high, and the paddies might flood. Too low, and the rice won't sprout. So he lifts the sluice gate just slightly, lets the water trickle through, then closes it again with a nod, like he and the river have an understanding. Historians still argue how formalized this role was. Some think certain monasteries trained monks specifically in water management as part of their duties. Others believe it was more informal, assigned to elder monks who lived near canals and had a talent for listening to dirt when it squishes. Regardless, these monks were vital. They kept the system running, not with bureaucracy, with intimacy. They knew the sound of good flow. They felt the air when a drought was coming. They could tell just from the way the sunlight reflected on a paddy if something downstream was blocked. These weren't superpowers, just attention, layered over decades. And more often than not, they lived in tiny huts beside these waterworks, simple structures like the one in front of you. A place to eat, sleep, pray, and check the flow. Every few days, they'd walk the canals checking for debris, erosion, damage. If a gate was stuck, they fixed it. If a channel overflowed, they adjusted it. If a fish got stuck somewhere awkward, well, they probably had a system for that too. You approach the platform and imagine a monk sitting cross-legged there. He's tracing lines in the dirt, not random doodles, but maps. Little diagrams showing how water should move, how it's moving now, and what will happen if the rains don't come next week. Water was predictable, yes, but only if you watched it. Every single day. A canal isn't a road. It doesn't stay stable on its own. It gets blocked, overgrown, tilted. So these monks became its memory. They passed knowledge down orally. When the wind shifts from the northeast, close the southern gate. When dragonflies dance low, expect a flood. When the sky glows orange after rain, the beret won't fill. They didn't write manuals. They lived them. And in exchange, the land bloomed. The rice ripened. The temples were fed. The city thrived. And the monks. They didn't ask for thanks. Just quiet. Just the sound of water doing what it was told. A quirky legend survives in one village, a monk who was so in tune with the canals. They say he could stop a leak just by meditating near it. People swore that when he sat at the edge of a broken sluice, the water would rise up and mend the earth like a cat curling into a lap. Did it happen? Who knows? But someone built a shrine where he used to sit. Even now, some farmers leave small offerings there before planting season. Not to a god, to a caretaker, to the one who made sure water flowed where it was needed. You turn your head and see the canal below you. It's dry now, cracked in places, but its slope is perfect. Its angle's still correct. The monk who watched over the stretch, he did his job. For decades, maybe longer. And though no one recites his name anymore, his work remains. Still guiding the land, still shaping memory, still waiting for rain. The ground softens beneath your feet as you move away from the monk's forgotten platform. There's a subtle change in the air, a trace of moisture. The kind that clings to the undersides of leaves and coats the backs of frogs like a second skin. You're nearing the old rice fields now. Or what used to be rice fields. It's hard to tell these days. The jungle's done a marvelous job of erasing boundaries, blurring the lines between what was cultivated and what was always wild. But if you tilt your head just a little, you can make out the ridges, the faint grid of what was once an organized, living, green machine. And in this part of the empire, the farmers had a clever trick up their sleeves. Floating rice beds. Yes, really. You see, during the wet season, the monsoon didn't just bring rain, it brought floods. Whole sections of lowland Angkor could disappear underwater for weeks. Rice paddies vanished. Pathways became ponds. And for most ancient civilizations, that would be a nightmare. But Khmer farmers, they just adjusted. Instead of trying to keep their rice dry, they figured out how to let it float. They wove floating mats of straw, hyacinths, banana leaves, anything light, buoyant, and marginally cooperative, and layered soil on top. Then they planted rice directly into these floating beds, anchoring them with stones or tied posts so they wouldn't drift into the baray and crash a temple ceremony. It was low-tech. It was weird. It was genius. These floating gardens rose and fell with the floodwaters. No need to drain anything. No panic over rainfall. Just buoyant bundles of carbohydrate potential bobbing peacefully on the empire's engineered tides. Historians still argue how widespread these practices were. Some believe they were used only in emergency flood years. Others think floating beds were a consistent backup plan, especially in lower-lying areas where the canals couldn't drain fast enough. But evidence from soil layers, sediment studies, and historical accounts suggest that, at least in certain seasons, farmers in the Khmer Empire weren't walking through their rice fields, they were rowing. Imagine it, a farmer in a canoe, pushing gently along a flooded plain, inspecting floating plots, a basket of seedlings at his side, maybe a fishing net behind him, just in case dinner swam too close. Because that's the thing, where you float rice, you also get fish. So these fields weren't just farms, they were multi-purpose ecosystems. Rice on top, fish below, and ducks. Oh, the ducks loved it. They paddled happily between the floating beds, eating insects, fertilizing as they went, don't think too hard about it, and occasionally stealing rice shoots when they thought no one was watching. But someone was always watching, because Khmer farmers were attuned. They didn't rely on weather forecasts, they read the weather, listened to frogs, watched the wind, counted the days since the last storm and adjusted their anchors accordingly. Even the placement of floating beds was strategic. Too close to the canal wall, you risked collision during a strong current. Too far into the open basin, the wind might scatter your crop like a poorly planned picnic. So farmers learned to cluster their beds in safe zones between trees, behind dikes, in natural pockets where the water pooled gently instead of surging. And it wasn't just survival, it was productivity. Floating rice didn't just survive the floods. In some years, it thrived. With no mud to bog down the roots and plenty of consistent hydration from below, these water-loving varieties grew fast, healthy, tall. And when the time came to harvest, you didn't even need to bend over. You just rowed up, pulled the rice, and piled it in your boat. Rice, boat, nap, repeat. A quirky bit of folklore from one farming village tells of a floating rice bed that drifted away in the night and was found 3 days later, with better yields than the ones that stayed put. The farmer allegedly declared the bed independent-minded and built it its own little shrine. The locals still leave sticky rice offerings there during planting season. Can't hurt. Right. You kneel beside what remains of a paddy's edge. The soil is spongy, soft. You dig a fingertip into it and feel the layers: mud, straw, a trace of charcoal from an old fire, maybe a burned rice bed, maybe a lightning strike, maybe just a memory. And you realize that while the barays and temples get the glory, it was these fields, these floating, anchored, sun-dappled patches of persistence that fed the empire. Because temples don't rise without rice, and rice doesn't rise without adaptation. You sit quietly for a moment, listening to the breeze play across the surface of a long-gone flood. And in that silence, you can almost hear it. The splash of a paddle, the rustle of floating stalks, the low, satisfied quack of a duck who thinks he's in charge. The empire floated, too, on water, on rice, on knowing when to build and when to drift. You rise slowly, brushing soil from your hands. A bird calls overhead, something long-tailed and invisible, and the breeze stirs again. This time, cooler. You follow a faded ridge that once divided paddies. Now a walkway for ants and the occasional overly curious traveler like yourself. The land ahead dips slightly, flattening into a basin that would have once held water during the monsoon's most generous months. But now, it's quiet. Cracked in places, grasses have crept in where ripples once ran. Because one season, the rain came too much, and it didn't stop. That was the year, some say, when the empire blinked. A super monsoon. Longer, harder, heavier than anything the barays or monks or floating rice beds had ever prepared for. The sky opened up like a broken jar and forgot to close. Historians still argue whether this storm was the final blow to the Khmer Empire's water system, or just one more burden on a city already stretched too thin. But sediment layers, tree ring data, and even temple erosion patterns all suggest one thing around the 14th century. The water didn't just rise, it stayed, and that was a problem. The system, for all its genius, depended on balance. Too little rain, and the canals ran dry. Too much, and they overflowed. And when they overflowed, the earth shifted, embankments softened, stone walls cracked. Water moved where it wasn't supposed to, flooding sanctuaries, rotting rice fields, washing away decades of careful planning in a matter of days. You imagine a monk standing at his post by a sluice gate, staring at water rising faster than he can release it. The gate creaks open. The water pushes through, but it isn't enough. The baray is full, the canals are full, the overflow ponds are full. There's nowhere else for it to go. And the rain keeps falling, day after day. At first, it must have seemed like a blessing. Finally, someone probably said, "We'll have a good harvest." Then it didn't stop. Crops drowned. Roads disappeared. Even temples built on high platforms began to suffer. In the jungle's low-lying quarters, entire neighborhoods were cut off. No boats, no bridges, just water, pressing in with that eerie silence floods always carry. And here's the catch. The very system designed to save Angkor might have doomed it. Because when your entire empire depends on an intricate, interconnected water management system, and that system becomes overwhelmed, there's no easy fix. There are too many moving parts. You can't patch one leak when 10 more are bursting. The monks couldn't drain the reservoirs fast enough. The canals, once so efficient, became clogged with sediment. Spillways overflowed. Terraces collapsed. And while the temple still stood, their foundations, those precisely managed layers of sand and clay, began to shift, crack, settle. Just a little at first, but enough. Enough that when the rain finally stopped, the damage had been done. Fields had been lost. Crops destroyed. Water quality ruined. Disease spread. People moved. Not all at once, but steadily. Quietly. A trickle of migration. Mirroring the system they'd once mastered. A quirky story survives from a nearby village. It's said that during the long rain, as they called it, the frogs grew louder than the monks, their chorus so constant that people believed they were trying to sing the water back into the sky. When the rain finally ceased, villagers credited the frogs and gave them offerings of rice for years after. But frogs can't fix a broken canal. And when the empire's infrastructure failed, the city faltered. Administrative centers shifted. Trade routes moved. Temples still held rituals. Yes, but with fewer voices, fewer offerings, fewer ears to hear the chants echo against stone. You kneel at the edge of one of these forgotten canals. It's shallow now, almost whimsical, with ferns sprouting from its sides like eager fans at a ghost concert. But if you close your eyes, you can still hear the rush, the unintended torrent that once carved through here. Water isn't malicious. It just moves. It follows paths we give it. And when we stop watching, when the gates aren't lifted, when the monks are gone, when the barays are full and the rain keeps falling, it finds new paths. Through temples, through homes, through empires. Even a system this grand couldn't control everything. And so, little by little, the water that once gave Angkor its power began to take it back, not with violence, with persistence. You leave the low basin behind, stepping carefully around a tree whose roots have split a section of stone like a soft biscuit. The path ahead winds through what was once a neighborhood, though now it's just earth, moss, and fallen fragments of wall that whisper someone lived here once. Not far from here, the remnants of a temple town stretch out across the jungle floor. It wasn't one of the showpiece sites, no towering towers, no elaborate bas-reliefs of gods doing yoga, just modest shrines, homes of the priestly class, possibly even housing for scribes and artisans who helped keep temple life functioning. But now the land is cracked, literally. The reservoirs once surrounding this temple are dry, or worse, almost dry, and that's somehow more tragic. Like a lake that hasn't quite admitted it's dead yet. You crouch beside one of them, a shallow depression, its walls once lined with tight stone slabs, now buckling slightly under the weight of time, or more accurately, under the absence of water. Because when the rain stops, and yes, there were years when it did, the system suffers a different kind of death. No floods, no dramatic destruction, just nothing. No flow through the canals, no irrigation, no rice, no water to cool temple courtyards, to bathe in before prayers, to reflect the faces of stone-carved gods. This is what came after the great floods, after the super monsoon. Years of drought that turned a water empire into a stone carcass, baking under the sun. Historians still argue whether the droughts or the floods did more damage. Some say it was the sudden shift between the two, the weather yo-yo that the system couldn't keep up with. Others believe it wasn't the climate alone, but the loss of management, the monks gone, the gates unmanned, the channels choked with mud and regret. But one thing's certain, temples that once sat high and dry on elevated foundations, they began to crack, literally and metaphorically, because the soil beneath them, that careful layering of sand and clay meant to breathe with the seasons, dried out, compacting, shrinking, shifting. Foundations wobbled, tiles loosened, intricate carvings once perfectly aligned tilted ever so slightly, as if even the gods were sighing and leaning away from the heat. You can still see it in the stones. Hairline fractures along the base, blocks that don't sit flush anymore, reliefs of dancers whose toes no longer touch the floor. It didn't happen all at once. The decline of the Khmer Empire wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was a long exhale, a slow fading, a city losing its rhythm. People began to move away from the center toward the Tonle Sap, toward more reliable rivers, toward places that didn't require so much faith in the sky. Temples were still used, of course. For a time, some were repurposed. Others maintained by small local groups who saw no reason to abandon their sacred sites just because the rain had mood swings. But without a functioning water system, Angkor's days as an imperial capital were numbered. Because an empire built on engineered rainfall can't survive on hope alone. You stand before a temple now low and partially collapsed. A quiet thing. Vines have claimed the doorframe. A bird flutters inside and out again, like it was checking on an old friend. This temple, like so many others, was once surrounded by its own mini moat, a shallow rectangle fed by a tiny canal that siphoned off overflow from a nearby reservoir. The moat is gone. The canal barely a groove in the ground, but you can trace it. And as you do, you can't help but admire the consistency of it all. Even in decline, the system stayed cohesive. Nothing was wasted. Water flowed from the barays to the temples, from the temples to the villages, from the villages to the fields, and back again in a cycle so deliberate. It feels ceremonial. It was a city made to last, until nature changed the rules. A quirky inscription found on a stone tablet near one of these lesser-known temples tells of a man who brought a fish to the temple pond each day, so the gods would not thirst. Whether it was symbolic or someone's very literal solution to a drying reservoir, we may never know. But the idea of feeding water to a place built to hold it, there's poetry in that. You step around a cracked wall and find yourself in a tiny square, what might have once been a monk's courtyard or a quiet meditation spot. In the center, a sunken circle, an old well, bone dry. You lean over and drop a pebble in, just to see. No splash, only silence. And yet even here, even now it feels alive. Because these structures, these ruins, these dried out veins, they still remember water. They were shaped by it, built for it, whispered to it. And they're waiting, always waiting, because rain may stop, people may leave, but the land remembers. And when the rain returns, it knows where to go. You linger by the dry well a little longer, listening to the faint rustle of wind in the trees, and imagining just for a moment what it once sounded like when water filled this space. A slow slosh as someone drew a bucket, the splash of rinsed hands, maybe even laughter, bouncing off the stone walls before disappearing into the jungle's dense green mouth. And then you begin to walk again. But something strange happens. Your path once firm, rooted and predictably earthy, turns to something else, softer, smoother. You look down and realize you're walking across earthwork so vast and subtle. It's invisible unless you're standing at the right angle. Or, as it turns out, unless you're floating hundreds of miles above it. Because modern scientists armed with satellites, LiDAR scanners, and a good sense of curiosity have revealed something astonishing. The full extent of Angkor's water system wasn't truly known until we looked at it from space. You pause, glance up at the gray-blue sky, and imagine a satellite lens quietly capturing the veins of a lost empire. Where once we saw isolated ruins, patches of jungle, and disconnected reservoirs, LiDAR revealed a sprawling urban grid. Canals, ponds, water tanks, roadways, all perfectly aligned, all stretching far beyond what anyone imagined. Angkor was massive. Not just a temple complex, not just a city. It was the largest pre-industrial urban center in the world at its peak. Historians still argue when exactly this peak occurred. Some say the 12th century during the reign of Jayavarman VII. Others believe the infrastructure had been in quiet bloom long before that. But the satellite imagery settled at least one thing. The Khmer didn't just build to survive. They built to organize nature. You walk now along what LiDAR has confirmed was once a major canal road dual purpose. Of course, because Khmer engineers were fans of multitasking. It served as both a water channel and a transport corridor. People paddled and walked side by side, probably waved at each other, possibly judged each other's paddling skills. From the sky, these lines look like capillaries, which, in a way, they were. Water moved through them to irrigate fields, supply temples, refill reservoirs downstream. But here's the thing, some of these channels had no visible outlet. Just long, meandering stretches that fed into nothing. That puzzled researchers for years, until they realized these weren't just water highways. They were also release valves, designed to soak water into the ground, to recharge the aquifer, to prevent flooding by easing excess rain into layers of soil that acted like a sponge. The Khmer weren't just thinking about the surface. They were thinking vertically. Above-ground reservoirs, mid-level canals, subsurface recharge zones, and this verticality, it's only visible from above. Only when you stitch the entire puzzle together with LiDAR and satellite images do the pieces form the full picture. And it's stunning. Where we once saw isolated monuments, now we see connection. Where we assumed randomness, now we see precision. And the wildest part, much of it is still buried, still hidden under tree roots and termite mounds and years of leaf mulch. Still waiting to be noticed, to be understood. You reach a rise now, a raised platform that once served as the foundation for a temple or perhaps an administrative building. There's not much left but a few stubborn cornerstones and some half-sunken boundary markers. But stand here on this modest hill, and you get a sense of scale. Look left, there's the faint ridge of a canal. Look right, another dried pond. Square-shaped, undoubtedly man-made. Beyond that, the jungle. But to the lighter, a grid, a layout, a system. A quirky moment from one of the first LiDAR expeditions, researchers found patterns in the forest. They couldn't explain looping paths, symmetrical bulges, bizarre S-shapes. Turns out some were garden layouts, others were ceremonial walkways, invisible to ground crews but perfectly clear from space. One pattern even turned out to be the remains of a hydraulic testing site, basically a Khmer water lab. That's how advanced this was. They didn't just build a system, they monitored it, tested it, improved it, and left the evidence so subtle it took a satellite to see it again. You turn in a slow circle atop the rise, imagining that bird's-eye view, a city of water, temples as nodes, barays as hearts, canals as veins, the jungle below, pretending to forget, and above it all, you. A dot in the story, but a dot standing on one of the most sophisticated environmental management systems ever created by human hands. You descend from the ridge slowly, your feet brushing through tall grass that sways like it still remembers being submerged. The land flattens again, and as you step into a soft clearing, a chill passes through the air, though not from temperature. More like a feeling, a sense that something waits below, because beneath your feet lies one of Angkor's forgotten reservoirs. Not famous like the East or West Baray, not honored in stone inscriptions, Not part of temple lore, just a quiet, buried basin once full of water, then mud, then memory, and now just earth. And yet, the shape remains a shallow depression, edges too regular to be natural. If you were flying overhead, you'd see it a perfect rectangle peeking through the canopy like a sigh. You pause near its center, standing where the deepest point once was. This is where the water lingered longest, where the lotus bloomed after all the others, where fish may have hidden in the last cool inches as the sun dried everything else. It's where people may have come to scoop the final, silty bucket of water during a desperate dry spell. It's where someone years ago or centuries may have whispered a prayer to a sky that wasn't listening. Historians still argue why so many of these smaller reservoirs were abandoned. Some blame soil erosion. Others suspect upstream diversions or canal blockages. A few say these were experiments, pilot projects that either succeeded quietly or failed just as quietly. But the real reason might be simpler. The empire changed. Populations shifted. Centers of power moved. And water so carefully harnessed was left to settle. Literally. Sediment built up in these reservoirs year after year. Without maintenance, they filled in. Slowly, naturally. Grass crept in, shrubs, eventually trees, and what was once a shimmering resource became just another low patch of forest floor. Invisible to most, but not to you, because now you see them everywhere. These sunken fields, these oddly symmetrical groves, these little dips in the earth that say, I used to be something. You kneel and touch the soil, darker here, richer, likely still damp underneath, the kind of dirt that remembers being mud, being stirred by frogs and scooped by clay pots, being disturbed by footsteps that no longer fall. And you wonder how many more of these lie buried across Angkor. How many quiet, functional miracles faded because no one noticed the system softening. Because that's the thing with infrastructure when it works. It becomes invisible. You only notice it when it stops. And here, in this clearing, the silence is total. No canal leads in. No gate remains. Just a ghost basin, still holding space, even if it holds no water. A quirky observation from a team doing soil surveys here, they found, layered in the silt, remnants of charred rice husks, meaning someone may have used fire to clear the floating beds or perhaps offered the last yield back to the gods when the reservoir began to fail. It's unclear whether this was ritual or resignation. You sit now on a fallen log beside what was once the southern edge of this reservoir. You imagine a family here, washing their clothes, cooling off at dusk, children splashing, elders watching, someone fishing with a net made of woven vine. It was a place of life, not dramatic, not royal, just essential. And now, even in its silence, it teaches you something. That not every piece of genius gets remembered. That some of the most incredible feats of design leave no monuments. Just curves in the earth, darkness in the soil, and the faintest scent of rain, carried by a breeze that has nowhere else to be. You rise again, brushing dirt from your palms, and glance back one last time at the quiet basin behind you. There's something reverent about it. The kind of reverence not born of grandeur, but of utility, of daily life, of a space that once mattered simply because it worked. You follow a narrow trail now, hemmed in by tall trees, until the jungle opens just slightly to reveal the soft ruins of what was once a maintenance compound. Not a temple, not a shrine, just practical buildings. And yet, in their own way, just as sacred, because this is where the system was sustained. Here, workers lived, Engineers? Carpenters? Maybe a few stubborn planners who insisted on digging one more canal despite everyone's eye-rolling. No one carved bas-reliefs for them. No one wrote songs. But without them, the empire's veins dried out. This was the backstage of the water world. Inside these walls, what remains of them tools would have been stored? Spare gate planks, iron chisels, buckets, possibly even blueprints drawn on palm leaf or scratched into clay. It's not glamorous, but without this place, nothing else would have held. Because Angkor's hydraulic system wasn't just built, it had to be maintained, constantly. Canals silted up, floodgates warped. Tree roots invaded stone lines with the persistence of an unpaid intern. And these workers, temple laborers, seasonal crews, conscripted villagers, they fixed it. Over and over. Historians still argue whether there was a formal corps of imperial water engineers, or whether it was handled locally by temple communities. Some inscriptions suggest royal oversight. Others point to decentralized, monastery-run management. In truth, probably both. A layered system. Like everything here. Monks handled temple drains. Farmers watched over local fields. And this compound. Maybe the hub that oversaw the trickiest parts. The baray embankments. The deep weirs. The complex gate assemblies that required more than one person and, frankly, a diagram. You step into what must have been a storage shed or the remains of one. The walls are knee-high now, roof long gone, but the corners are squared. Measured? Built with intention. Imagine the tools here. Wooden wedges soaked to swell and tighten their fit. Stone mallets carved with the marks of their makers. Even simple things, ropes twisted from bark. Bamboo measuring sticks calibrated for the gentle slope of water. Someone had to know the land, not just generally, but intimately. Where the water pooled too fast, where it needed coaxing. How many degrees a gate had to tilt before the flow reached a field 10 minutes away? This was a job of precision wrapped in mud and sweat. And yes, sometimes failure. Because even the best systems break. And when they did, the crew came out. At dawn, at midnight, in storms, in heat, to haul debris, patch leaks, adjust gates, and they did it for generations. Not chasing glory, just making sure things worked. There's something beautiful in that. A kind of anonymous brilliance. A quirky record from a surviving Khmer inscription mentions a man named Kantu, the one who fixed the gate when it sang. Historians believe that may refer to the high-pitched sound of warped wooden sluice gates, meaning Kantu was either a hydraulic savant or a guy with excellent hearing and a lot of patience. Either way, his name survived. Most others didn't. And yet, here you are, walking their footsteps, tracing their calluses, admiring a wall that once held the tools that held the empire. You wander further and find the outline of a work trench, narrow, stone-lined, clearly designed to be accessed by hand, possibly a channel used for testing new materials, or maybe for training apprentices. You like that idea. A small boy, up to his knees in muddy water, being taught by his uncle how to place stone without disrupting flow. Let the water lead, the uncle probably said. Not too fast, not too slow. And the boy, he listened. And later, when he grew up, he became the one fixing the gate when it sang. That's how the system endured. Not through kings, through knowledge, passed hand to hand. Not in libraries, but in muscle memory. You stand quietly now among crumbled stone, soft moss, and sunlight filtered through old trees. This was never meant to last forever, but for a while it held. And because of that, so did everything else. You leave the maintenance compound behind with a kind of hushed respect, as if nodding to a crew that's just off-shift ghosts in sandals, still wiping their hands on the hems of tunics, still muttering about those upstream monks and their ridiculous weir angles. The jungle starts to open again, but not into a clearing, into a space shaped. You can feel it. The edges of the trees recede in a way that feels planned, not wild, and then you see it. A reservoir. But this time, one that still holds water. A quiet, still pool-long, rectangular, lined with moss and shadow. Birds perch on the far edge. A frog plinks the surface, then disappears. You step forward, your foot brushing against the gentle rise of a retaining wall. Stone blocks, still tightly fitted. A few sunken, one half swallowed by a tree. But the line is there, sharp, deliberate, and more than a little impressive. This isn't a monument, it's a survivor. One of the few reservoirs that somehow never dried, never overflowed disastrously, never vanished beneath the weight of collapse or forgetfulness. A baray too modest to fail, too well placed to fall apart. And its presence here says something that no inscription ever did. The system worked, not just in theory, not just at scale, but still now, even centuries later, when the monks are gone and the king's name is worn off the stone and the canals are just bumps in the jungle, this one piece of it continues, holding water, catching rain, filling in the dry season and giving back in the wet. You crouch at the edge, run your fingers along the stone slick, cold, and familiar in the way a well-used tool is familiar. The kind of tool that doesn't shout. It performs. And this reservoir has been performing for 1,000 years. Historians still argue why this one lasted. Some say it was perfectly placed, shielded by slope, fed by an upstream spring that never gave out. Others credit its simple design. No grand embankments, no ornate weirs, just a low, stable pit with strong walls and a humble inlet. Whatever the reason, it held. And not just water, it held memory. And even now, standing here, you feel its quiet resilience rippling across the surface. It's more than a reservoir. It's a lesson that not everything needs to be grand. That sometimes the most durable parts of a system are the least glamorous. That maybe the real legacy of the Khmer Empire isn't the soaring towers of Angkor Wat or the perfectly symmetrical canals seen from space. Maybe it's this: a pond, still full, still useful, still waiting for a farmer who's long gone but may yet return. You walk slowly around its perimeter. On one side, there's the broken remnants of a sluice channel half filled with soil now, but still shaped. You could trace the line of it with your foot if you wanted. The water once flowed out that way, down toward fields that are now a tangle of roots and shadow. On the far edge, a few stones rise higher. A platform, maybe. A place for collecting, for washing, for praying, or simply for sitting. You do just that. Sit. Let the silence settle. Let the water reflect the clouds. Let the idea of this ancient reservoir still here, still functioning, soak into your thoughts. A quirky modern ritual has emerged in some nearby villages during planting season. Elders bring young children to this reservoir and toss pebbles in, one for each family member, asking the water to remember their names. Whether it's a new tradition or one carried quietly through centuries, no one's sure. But the water listens either way. And now you understand something. This isn't just history. It's hydrology as heritage. It's water as wisdom. And the people who once managed it, they knew something we forget. That managing water isn't about domination. It's about relationship. You don't control the rain, you prepare for it. You learn its moods, you respect its timing, and you build humbly, quietly, patiently to invite it in when it comes, and to hold it gently when it leaves. You watch the reservoir ripple once more. A dragonfly skims across. A leaf falls and settles on the surface. And you realize this. The water may change, but the design endures. Because the Khmer Empire didn't just leave ruins. It left rhythms. Still pulsing, still flowing, still waiting for someone to notice. The dragonfly disappears. The ripples soften, and you take one final step away from the reservoir's edge. Not because you're done, but because the story has led you here, this quiet ending where nothing dramatic happens, and yet everything shifts. You follow the soft trail back through the jungle, feeling how the land subtly guides your steps. Every incline, every shallow dip, it all echoes. What you now know, this wasn't just a city with water. This was a city made of water. Every decision, every measurement, every carved channel and carefully sloped path, none of it was random. It was all deliberate, purposeful, patient. The kind of patience that only civilizations with deep time and deeper trust in the sky can afford. And now, as you walk through what remains, you see the genius more clearly than ever before, because it was never just about catching the rain. It was about understanding it, and living with it, and making room for its contradictions. Too little, store it. Too much, divert it. Just right, let it flow. This is the wisdom that built Angkor, and the wisdom that sustained it for centuries. Historians still argue whether this water system was unique or whether other ancient civilizations had something similar. Sure, Rome had aqueducts. The Incas had terraces. But what sets Angkor apart, what truly astounds modern engineers, is the sheer scale and subtlety of it all. No towering water wheels. No stone bragging. Just a quiet, sprawling network of ponds, pipes, moats, and monks, so much of it invisible, until it wasn't, until the rain turned, until the gates rusted, until the jungle said, "I'll take it from here." But even now, centuries later, that system still speaks, in the curve of a forgotten canal, in the echo of a temple drain, in the shiver of leaves after a passing cloud. A final quirky theory among some researchers that parts of the Angkor water system were never meant to be controlled entirely. That the engineers, wise in their own right, designed it with flexibility, knowing the weather could not be ruled, only persuaded. Like building a musical instrument that plays best when the wind is right. You like that, because in the end, maybe that's the real achievement. Not that the Khmer built canals and barays and temples that still stand, but that they built systems, ones that could breathe, adapt, fail with grace, and be remembered, not because they were loud, but because they were lasting. You return now to the edge of a mossy wall, vines curled along its cracks like fingers holding on. Somewhere behind you, the reservoir still holds its water. Somewhere ahead, the jungle stretches on, indifferent but not unkind. And under your feet, lines, channels, memory, still waiting for the rain, still holding the sky's secrets in stone, still here, always here. So now, as you let your eyes close or maybe just soften, you're not really in a jungle anymore. You're drifting, gently, through the barays, floating alongside monks who don't speak much, but who adjust a sluice gate with the same care as lighting a candle. You're walking beside a farmer who smiles at the rising water and says, "Just enough." You're watching the clouds gather slow, sure, not threatening, just generous. And all around you, the land breathes with quiet confidence because it knows what to do with the rain. It has channels, it has rhythm, and even in the silence of centuries, it still remembers how to flow. So you do the same. You let go of the maps, the dates, the measurements. Let the names blur. Let the system settle. And just drift. Drift through the canals of memory. Drift through the temples of patience. Drift through the soft, steady, whispering breath of a world that built its soul out of water. And now you sleep. As still as a beret in moonlight, as calm as a temple drain after rain, as certain as the path water takes when the land says, "Here, this way, I've been waiting."